The unmarked grave behind the saloon in Laredo, Texas, held the only man Miranda Hayes had ever loved, until she met the cowboy who would change everything. Miranda stood at the edge of town that September evening in 1878, her worn leather satchel packed with everything she owned, which was not much. The sun was setting over the dusty streets, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her too much of blood and fire. She had lived in Laredo for 3 years, working tables at the Silver Dollar Saloon, saving every penny she could scrape together. Tomorrow at dawn, she would finally leave this place behind. The sound of boots on wooden planks made her turn. Colton Davies stood there, hat in hand, his sandy hair catching the last rays of sunlight. He had been coming to the saloon for 6 months now, always sitting at the same corner table, always ordering coffee instead of whiskey, always watching her with those steady gray eyes that seemed to see right through the walls she had built around herself. "Heard you talking to Maggie," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot. "Heard you say you were leaving at dawn." Miranda felt her chest tighten. She had not meant for anyone to overhear that conversation. "That is none of your concern, Mr. Davies." "Then I am riding with you," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of jest or cruelty, but found only determination. "You do not even know where I am going." "Does not matter." He stepped closer, and she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. "This town is no place for a woman traveling alone. The roads are dangerous." "I have been taking care of myself for a long time," Miranda said, her voice sharper than she intended. "I do not need some cowboy thinking he has to rescue me." Colton put his hat back on, settling it low over his eyes. "I do not think you need rescuing. I think you are the strongest person I have ever met. But strong does not mean foolish, and riding alone means you are asking for trouble." Miranda turned away from him, looking back at the town that had been both her prison and her salvation. When she had arrived here 3 years ago, she had been running from a man who had killed her brother in cold blood over a poker game in San Antonio. She had witnessed the murder, had testified against him, and had been running ever since. Word had reached her 2 weeks ago that he had finally been hanged, and for the first time in 3 years she could breathe freely. She could go anywhere she wanted. She could start over. "I am going to California," she said quietly. "I have a cousin in Sacramento. She runs a boarding house and said I could work for her, help her manage the place." "California is a long way from here," Colton said. "At least 2 months of hard riding, longer if you take a wagon. You will need supplies, someone to watch your back." "Why would you do this?" Miranda turned to face him again. "Why would you give up your life here to ride with some saloon girl you barely know?" The look he gave her made her heart skip. "Because in 6 months of watching you, I have seen you comfort crying children, give your own supper to hungry drifters, and work yourself to exhaustion every single night. I have seen you read books by candlelight when you think no one is looking, and I have heard you sing when you are alone in the kitchen. I have seen kindness and intelligence and beauty that takes my breath away. So when you ask why I would ride with you, the answer is simple. Because I cannot imagine staying here if you are gone." Miranda felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had learned long ago that tears were a luxury she could not afford. "You do not know me, Colton. You do not know what I have done, where I have been." "Then tell me on the road," he said. "We will have plenty of time." She studied him in the fading light. Colton Davies was not a large man, but he was solid, built like someone who had spent his life working hard. He had kind eyes and a quiet way about him that she found comforting. She knew he worked at the Johnson Ranch just outside town, breaking horses and mending fences. She knew he was 26 years old, 2 years older than herself. She knew he had lost his parents to fever when he was young and had been on his own ever since. What she did not know was whether she could trust him with her life, with her heart. "I leave at dawn," she said finally. "If you are serious, meet me at the north edge of town. Bring enough supplies for 2 months. We will ride hard and fast, and I will not slow down for anyone." Colton's face broke into a smile that transformed him from merely handsome to breathtaking. "I will be there." Miranda nodded and walked away before she could change her mind, before she could let herself hope too much. Hope was dangerous. Hope could get you killed. That night, she lay in her narrow bed above the saloon, listening to the sounds of drinking and gambling below. She had said her goodbyes to Maggie earlier, to the woman who had given her a job when no one else would. Maggie had hugged her tight and pressed $20 into her hand, money Miranda tried to refuse, but Maggie insisted. "You deserve happiness, girl," Maggie had said, her eyes wet with tears. "You go find it in California. And if that cowboy is fool enough to let you get away, you send him back to me and I will give him a piece of my mind." Now, alone in the darkness, Miranda let herself think about Colton. She had noticed him from the first day he walked into the saloon. How could she not? He was different from the other men, quieter, more respectful. He had never tried to grab her or proposition her like so many others did. He had simply sat at his table, drinking his coffee and watching her with those eyes that seemed to see everything. She had told herself not to care, not to wonder, not to hope. Men were trouble. Men were danger. Men were the reason she had lost her brother and spent 3 years looking over her shoulder, but Colton did not feel dangerous. He felt like safety, like home, like everything she had been searching for without knowing it. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams. When Miranda woke, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east. She dressed quickly in her traveling clothes, sturdy brown trousers and a blue cotton shirt that had seen better days. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up under a wide-brimmed hat. She strapped her brother's knife to her belt and slung her satchel over her shoulder. The saloon was quiet as she made her way down the back stairs. Maggie was already up, standing in the kitchen with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Food for the journey," Maggie said, pressing it into Miranda's hands. "There is bread and dried beef and some of those sugar cookies you like so much." "Maggie, you have already given me so much," Miranda protested, but Maggie waved her off. "Hush now. You take it and be grateful. And you write to me when you get to California, you hear? I want to know you arrived safely." Miranda hugged her one more time, breathing in the familiar scent of flour and whiskey that always clung to Maggie. "Thank you for everything. Go on now before I start crying again," Maggie said, pushing her toward the door. "That cowboy is probably already waiting for you." Miranda stepped out into the cool morning air. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the town was still sleeping. She walked quickly through the empty streets, her boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. When she reached the north edge of town, her heart sank. Colton was not there. She stood alone, watching the horizon lighten, and told herself she was not disappointed. She had known it was too good to be true. He had probably come to his senses, realized what a foolish idea it was to ride all the way to California with a woman he barely knew. It was better this way. She worked better alone. She did not need anyone. She was about to start walking when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She turned and saw Colton riding toward her, leading a second horse. As he drew closer, she could see he had packed saddlebags full of supplies and had bedrolls tied behind both saddles. "Sorry I am late," he said, dismounting smoothly. "Had to settle my affairs at the ranch and it took longer than I expected." Miranda stared at him, at the horses, at the supplies. "You really meant it?" "I never say things I do not mean," Colton said. He held out the reins of the second horse, a pretty bay mare with intelligent eyes. "This is Rosie. She is gentle but fast, and she will carry you safely." Miranda took the reins with trembling fingers. The reality of what she was doing, of what they were doing together, suddenly hit her. "Colton, I need you to understand something. I am not looking for a husband. I am not looking for romance. I just need to get to California safely." "I understand," he said, and she thought she saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but he masked it quickly. "I am offering you companionship and protection, nothing more. Whatever else happens, that is up to you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She mounted Rosie, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. Her brother had taught her to ride when she was young, back when life was simple and full of possibility. Colton swung up onto his own horse, a big chestnut gelding he called Red. "Ready, ready," Miranda said. They rode north out of Laredo as the sun broke over the horizon, leaving behind the only life Miranda had known for 3 years. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all scrubland and mesquite trees and endless sky. They rode in silence for the first few hours, both lost in their own thoughts. It was not until they stopped to water the horses at a small creek that Colton finally spoke. "Tell me about your cousin in Sacramento." Miranda knelt by the creek, splashing cool water on her face. "Her name is Margaret. She is my mother's sister's daughter. We wrote letters for years after my parents died, and when I needed a place to go, she offered me a home." "What happened to your parents?" Colton asked gently. "Cholera," Miranda said. "I was 16. They died within a week of each other, and then it was just me and my brother Thomas." "And Thomas," Miranda's throat tightened. "He was killed 3 years ago, shot over a card game by a man named Jack Mercer. I saw it happen. I testified against Mercer, and he swore he would kill me too, so I ran." Colton was quiet for a long moment. "That is why you have been in Laredo." "That is why I have been hiding in Laredo," Miranda corrected. "Mercer was finally hanged 2 weeks ago. The marshal sent word. I am finally free to live my life without looking over my shoulder." "I am sorry about your brother," Colton said, and the sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with tears. "He was a good man. Stupid sometimes, but good. He got mixed up with the wrong crowd, started gambling to try to make money after our parents died. It got him killed." They remounted and continued riding. The day grew hot, the sun beating down mercilessly on the dry land. Miranda was grateful for her hat and for the canteen of water Colton had packed. They rode steadily, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat some of the food Maggie had packed. As the sun began to set, Colton pointed to a copse of trees in the distance. "We can make camp there. Get some protection from the wind." They rode to the trees and dismounted. While Colton tended to the horses, Miranda gathered wood for a fire. They worked together in easy silence, each knowing their tasks. When the fire was crackling and the horses were settled, they sat across from each other, sharing dried beef and hard biscuits. "Tell me about yourself," Miranda said. "I know so little about you." Colton gazed into the fire. "Not much to tell. Born in Tennessee, came west with my parents when I was 10. They died of fever when I was 15, and I have been working ranches ever since. Saved up enough money to buy some land of my own someday, start a small horse ranch maybe." "Why did you leave the Johnson ranch?" "I thought you liked working there." "I did. I do. But they will understand. Pete Johnson is a good man, and I explained the situation. He gave me his blessing and told me if I ever come back through, there will be a job waiting for me." Miranda studied him across the flames. His face was half in shadow, strong jaw, straight nose, eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "You gave up a steady job, a place you liked for this, for me." "I told you why," Colton said, meeting her gaze. I could not stand the thought of you riding off alone, and I meant what I said. I have watched you for 6 months, Miranda. I have seen who you are. That matters more to me than any job. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough, he said. I know you are brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for. I know you read poetry when you think no one is watching. I know you hum to yourself when you are nervous. I know you deserve better than what life has given you so far. Miranda felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen for 3 long years. Colton, I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to let someone in. Every person I have ever loved has left me one way or another. I am not going anywhere, he said firmly. I promised to ride with you to California, and I keep my promises. What happens after that, well, that is up to you. They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sounds of the night. Eventually, Colton spread out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Get some sleep, he said. I will take first watch. Watch for what? Miranda asked, settling into her blankets. Anything. We are not the only ones traveling these roads, and not everyone has good intentions. Miranda wanted to argue, to tell him she did not need protecting, but exhaustion was pulling at her. She closed her eyes and was asleep within minutes. She woke sometime in the night to find Colton sitting with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, staring out into the darkness. The fire had burned down to embers, casting just enough light to see his profile. He looked tired but alert, and Miranda felt a rush of gratitude that this man had chosen to ride with her. Colton, she called softly. He turned to her. You should be sleeping. So should you. Let me take a turn. He hesitated, then nodded. All right. Wake me if you see or hear anything unusual. They switched places. Miranda sat with her back against the tree, her brother's knife within easy reach. She watched Colton settle into his bedroll and fall asleep almost immediately. In the faint light of the embers, he looked younger, more vulnerable, and she felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her. She had not asked for this. She had not asked for him to care about her, to follow her, to look at her like she was something precious. But now that he had, she could not imagine making this journey without him. The night passed slowly. Miranda watched the stars wheel overhead and listened to the sounds of coyotes howling in the distance. When the sky began to lighten in the east, she woke Colton. They broke camp quickly and were riding again as the sun rose. The landscape began to change as they traveled, becoming rockier and more rugged. They followed old trails and cattle paths, stopping at small towns and settlements to replenish their water and buy supplies. 3 days into their journey, they reached a town called Uvalde. It was larger than Laredo, with a proper main street and several stores. They stopped at the general store to buy more food and ammunition. While Colton was talking to the storekeeper, Miranda browsed the shelves. She found a small journal with blank pages and bought it with some of the money Maggie had given her. She had always wanted to write down her thoughts, to record her life, but had never had the time or means before. When they left Uvalde, they rode west toward the Pecos River. The terrain grew more challenging, with steep hills and narrow passes. They had to slow their pace, letting the horses pick their way carefully over loose rocks and through thorny brush. One afternoon, about a week into their journey, they were following a narrow trail along a ridgeline when Red suddenly reared, neighing in alarm. Colton fought to control him, and Miranda pulled Rosie to a stop behind them. "What is it?" she called. "Rattler," Colton said, pointing to a large snake coiled in the middle of the trail, its tail buzzing a warning. They backed the horses up and found another way around. But the incident left them both shaken, a reminder of how dangerous the journey could be. That night, as they made camp beside a small spring, Miranda pulled out her new journal and began to write by the light of the fire. She wrote about the journey, about the landscape, about Colton. "What are you writing?" he asked, looking up from the rabbit he was skinning for their supper. "Just thoughts. Things I want to remember," Miranda said. "Will you let me read it someday?" She considered this. "Maybe. Someday." They cooked the rabbit and ate it with some beans Colton had soaked earlier. The meat was tough but flavorful, and Miranda was hungry enough not to care. They had been living on dried beef and biscuits for days, and fresh meat was a welcome change. "Tell me about your dreams," Colton said as they ate. "What do you want to do once you get to California?" Miranda thought about this. "I want to help Margaret with her boarding house. I want to save money and maybe someday have a place of my own. A little house with a garden, somewhere quiet and peaceful. I want to read books and watch the sunset and not have to worry about running anymore." "That sounds nice," Colton said. "Simple but nice. What about you? What do you want?" "I want land," he said without hesitation. "A place to raise horses. Good horses, the kind people will travel from all over to buy. I want a home, a real home, not just a bunkhouse on someone else's ranch. I want a family someday, kids to teach everything I know, to pass something on to." "You would be a good father," Miranda said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. She could picture Colton teaching a child to ride, to rope, to be strong and kind like he was. "You would be a good mother," he said, meeting her eyes across the fire. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Miranda looked away first, her heart pounding. This was dangerous territory. She had promised herself not to fall for him, not to let herself hope for something that might not be real. But with each day they spent together, it became harder to maintain that distance. Colton was kind and patient and funny in ways she had not expected. He told her stories about his childhood, about the horses he had trained, about the places he had been. He listened when she talked, really listened, asking questions and remembering details. They fell into an easy routine over the following weeks. They rode from dawn until mid-afternoon, when the heat became too oppressive for the horses. They would find shade and rest through the hottest part of the day, then ride again until sunset. They made camp, cooked, talked, and slept, then did it all again the next day. They crossed the Pecos River on a ferry run by a grizzled old man who charged them $2, and tried to charge more until Colton gave him a look that made him back down. The river was low this time of year, but still wide and deep, and Miranda was grateful not to have to swim the horses across. West of the Pecos, the land became even more harsh and unforgiving. They were entering the desert proper now, and water became scarce. They had to plan their route carefully, following a map Colton had bought in Uvalde that showed the locations of springs and wells. One particularly hot afternoon, they were riding through an area of towering rock formations when they spotted a group of riders in the distance. Colton immediately pulled Red to a stop and motioned for Miranda to follow him into the shelter of the rocks. "Who are they?" Miranda whispered. "Cannot tell from here. Could be cowboys, could be bandits. Either way, better to avoid them." They waited in the shade of the rocks, hardly daring to breathe as the riders passed by about a quarter-mile away. There were 6 of them, rough-looking men with rifles slung across their saddles. Miranda felt Colton tense beside her, his hand resting on his own rifle. The riders passed without seeing them, and Colton and Miranda waited another hour before venturing back onto the trail. But the encounter had rattled them both. "This is exactly why I did not want you riding alone," Colton said as they rode. "Men like that would not have thought twice about robbing you or worse." "I know," Miranda said quietly. "Thank you for being here." He glanced at her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I will always be here, Miranda, as long as you want me." They rode on in silence, but something had shifted between them. The walls Miranda had built around her heart were crumbling, piece by piece, and she found she did not have the strength to keep rebuilding them. That night, they camped in a narrow canyon that offered protection from the wind. As they sat by the fire, Miranda found herself sitting closer to Colton than usual, their shoulders almost touching. "I am scared," she admitted suddenly. "Not of the journey, but of what happens after. I am scared of getting to California and realizing I do not belong there either. I am scared of being alone again." Colton reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm, and his fingers curled around hers with gentle strength. "You are not alone. You have me. But for how long?" Miranda asked, her voice breaking. "You said you would ride with me to California, but what then? You have your own dreams, your own life to live. I cannot ask you to give that up for me." "You are not asking. I am offering." He turned to face her fully. "Miranda, these past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Not because of where we are going, but because I am going there with you. I know you are scared. I know you have lost people you love. But I am not going anywhere. I am right here, and I am not leaving. You promise," she whispered. "I promise," he said, and then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Miranda did not pull away. She let him close the distance between them, let his lips meet hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and filled with promise. When they broke apart, Miranda was crying, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry. I do not mean to cry." "Do not apologize," Colton said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. "You have been strong for so long. You are allowed to feel things." They held each other by the fire that night, talking until the flames burned low. Miranda told him about her childhood, about her parents and the life they had built before disease took them. She told him about Thomas, about the good times before gambling consumed him. She told him about the fear that had followed her for 3 years, the constant looking over her shoulder, the nightmares. Colton told her about losing his parents, about the loneliness of being 15 and on your own. He told her about the ranches he had worked, the men he had met, the lessons he had learned. He told her about seeing her that first day at the saloon and knowing, somehow, that his life had just changed. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, they placed them side by side instead of on opposite sides of the fire. Miranda fell asleep holding Colton's hand, and for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. The journey continued. They passed through small settlements and ghost towns, crossed dry creek beds and climbed rocky hills. The desert gave way to grasslands as they moved into New Mexico territory, and the change in landscape felt like a new beginning. In a town called Roswell, they stopped for 2 days to rest the horses and replenish their supplies. They found a small boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, who gave them separate rooms and served them hearty meals of beef stew and cornbread. On their second evening in Roswell, Colton took Miranda for a walk through the town. It was a pleasant evening, cooler than it had been during the day, and the streets were busy with people going about their business. They stopped at a small church at the edge of town. It was a simple building, whitewashed wood with a tall steeple, and through the open door they could hear someone playing the piano. "My mother used to play piano," Miranda said softly. "She would play every Sunday after church. I loved listening to her." "Do you play?" Colton asked. "No. She tried to teach me, but I was too restless, too eager to be outside. I wish now that I had paid more attention." They stood listening for a while, and then Colton took her hand. "Dance with me." "Here, now," Miranda looked around at the empty street. "Why not? No one is watching." He pulled her into his arms, and they swayed together to the faint music drifting from the church. Miranda rested her head against his chest and let herself be held, let herself feel safe and cherished and loved. "I am falling in love with you," Colton said quietly. I know you did not want this, did not ask for it, but I cannot help it. Every day I spend with you, I fall a little more." Miranda looked up at him, her heart in her throat. "I am falling for you too. It terrifies me, but I am." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the street, and Miranda kissed him back with everything she had. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. "So what do we do now?" Miranda asked. "We keep going," Colton said. "We get you to California like we planned. And then, if you want, we figure out how to build a life together. Your dreams and mine, all mixed up together." "I would like that," Miranda said, and realized she meant it more than she had ever meant anything. They left Roswell the next morning, riding west with renewed purpose. The land continued to change around them, becoming more mountainous as they approached the Continental Divide. The air grew cooler, especially at night, and they were grateful for the extra blankets they had bought. One afternoon, as they were crossing a high mountain pass, they encountered a family traveling in the opposite direction. The father, a weathered man with kind eyes, warned them about a group of bandits operating in the area. "They have been hitting travelers on this stretch of road for the past month," the man said. "Took everything we had except our wagon and team. You folks be careful." After the family moved on, Colton and Miranda discussed their options. They could turn back and find another route, which would add weeks to their journey, or they could continue on, being extra cautious and prepared for trouble. "I am tired of running," Miranda said. "I am tired of letting fear dictate my choices. We have supplies, we have weapons, and we have each other. I say we keep going." Colton studied her face. "You are sure?" "I am sure." They rode on, hyper alert to every sound and movement. They avoided the main trail when possible, sticking to less traveled paths. They took turns keeping watch at night, sleeping in shifts. 3 days after the encounter with the family, their caution proved necessary. They were making their way through a narrow canyon when Miranda spotted movement on the rocks above them. "Colton," she said urgently, and he looked up just as 3 men appeared, rifles pointed at them. "Well now, what do we have here?" The leader was a tall man with a scarred face and cruel eyes. "Looks like a couple of travelers with nice horses and probably some money." "We do not want any trouble," Colton said evenly, his hand moving slowly toward his rifle. "I do not care what you want," the man said. "I want those horses and whatever you got in those saddlebags. You hand them over nice and peaceful, and maybe we will let you live." Miranda's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. "And if we refuse," the man laughed, "then we take them anyway and you die. Simple as that." Colton's eyes met Miranda's and she saw the calculation there. 3 men, 3 rifles. The odds were not good. But the canyon walls were high and steep, and the bandits had to come down to get to them. "All right," Colton said, raising his hands. "We will give you what you want, just do not hurt her." The leader grinned. "Smart man. Now climb down off those horses real slow." Colton and Miranda dismounted, keeping their hands visible. The 3 bandits began making their way down from the rocks, confident in their victory. What they did not see was Colton's subtle nod to Miranda, or the way she shifted her position to give him a clear line of sight. The moment the bandits were on the ground, Colton moved. He dove for his rifle, rolling behind Red for cover. The bandits fired, but their shots went wide. Miranda pulled her brother's knife and threw it in one smooth motion. It caught one of the men in the shoulder, and he dropped his rifle with a cry. Colton fired once, twice. The leader fell, clutching his leg. The 3rd man, seeing his companions down, turned and ran. Colton fired again, but the shot missed as the man scrambled back up the rocks and disappeared. The leader was writhing on the ground, cursing. The man Miranda had hit with the knife was leaning against the canyon wall, pale and shaking. "Go," Colton said to them. Take your friend and go. If I ever see either of you again, I will not aim for the leg." The injured man helped the leader to his feet, and they stumbled away, leaving a trail of blood behind them. Colton turned to Miranda, who was shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she managed. "You?" "Fine." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You threw that knife like a professional. Thomas taught me. He said every woman should know how to defend herself." She looked up at Colton. "We make a good team." "We do," he agreed. He retrieved her knife, wiped it clean, and handed it back to her. "Let us get out of this canyon before they decide to come back with reinforcements." They rode hard for the rest of the day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the bandits. By evening, they had crossed the Continental Divide and were descending into Arizona territory. They made camp in a grove of pine trees, the first real trees they had seen in weeks. The air smelled of resin and earth, and the temperature was pleasantly cool. "We are more than halfway there," Colton said as they sat by the fire. "Another month, maybe less, and we will be in California." Miranda stared into the flames, thinking about everything that had happened. What if Margaret does not have room for both of us? What if she only wanted me? "Then we will find a place nearby. We will figure it out, Miranda. We always do." She moved closer to him, seeking his warmth and comfort. "I do not want to lose you. I just found you." "You are not going to lose me," he said firmly. He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "I love you, Miranda Hayes. I love your strength and your courage and your kind heart. I love the way you hum when you are nervous and the way you wrinkle your nose when you are thinking. I love everything about you, and I am not going anywhere." "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now. "I fought it for so long, but I cannot fight it anymore. I love you, Colton Davies." They kissed under the pine trees, surrounded by the sounds of the forest. When they finally settled into their bedrolls, they lay close together, sharing warmth and comfort. The next few weeks passed in a blur of travel and discovery. They crossed Arizona territory, passing through Flagstaff and marveling at the height of the San Francisco peaks. They descended into the desert again, crossing the Colorado River into California. California was everything Miranda had imagined and more. The landscape was harsh in some places, beautiful in others. They passed through mining towns full of rough men seeking gold, through farming communities where families worked the land. As they got closer to Sacramento, Miranda felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had not seen Margaret in person for years, had only exchanged letters. What if they did not get along? What if Margaret had changed her mind about the job offer? "Stop worrying," Colton said one morning as they rode. "Everything is going to work out." "How can you be so sure?" "Because we make our own luck. We have come this far together. We will figure out the rest." They reached Sacramento on a warm October afternoon, 2 months after leaving Laredo. The city was larger than anywhere Miranda had been, full of bustling streets and tall buildings. They asked for directions and found Margaret's boarding house on a quiet street near the river. It was a large 2-story building painted yellow with white trim. A sign out front read "Hayes House" in neat letters. Miranda felt tears prick her eyes at the sight of her family name. They tied their horses out front and climbed the steps to the front door. Miranda knocked, her heart pounding. The door opened, and a woman stood there. She was in her 30s, with brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that reminded Miranda of her mother. "Miranda," the woman said, and then she was pulling Miranda into her arms. "Oh, my dear girl, you made it. I was so worried." "Margaret," Miranda said, hugging her cousin tight, "it is so good to see you." Margaret pulled back and looked at Colton. "And who is this?" "This is Colton Davies," Miranda said. "He rode with me from Texas. He kept me safe." Margaret's eyes sparkled with understanding. "Well, Mr. Davies, any friend of Miranda's is welcome here. Come in, both of you. You must be exhausted." They followed Margaret inside. The boarding house was comfortable and well kept, with a large sitting room and a dining room that could seat at least 20 people. Margaret showed them upstairs to 2 rooms side by side. "Dinner is at 6, she said. "We have 8 guests right now, all good people. Wash up and rest and come down when you are ready." After Margaret left, Miranda stood in her room and looked around. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out on the street. She could hear Colton moving around in the room next door. She knocked on the connecting door and he opened it immediately. "Nice place." "It is," Miranda agreed. "Margaret seems wonderful. She does." Colton looked at her seriously. "We need to talk about what happens now." "I know." Miranda took a deep breath. "I want to work here, help Margaret like I promised, but I also want to be with you. I do not know how to do both. What if I got a job nearby?" "There are bound to be ranches or farms that need workers. We could court properly, take our time, and when we are both ready, we could get married, start our life together." Miranda felt hope bloom in her chest. "You would do that? Stay here instead of going back to Texas?" "Miranda, I would stay anywhere if it meant being with you. Texas, California, anywhere. You are my home now." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. That evening they had dinner with Margaret and the other boarders. The food was good, the company pleasant, and Miranda felt a sense of peace she had not felt in years. This could work. She could build a life here. After dinner, she and Margaret sat on the front porch while Colton talked with some of the men about job opportunities. "He loves you," Margaret said. "It is written all over his face." "I love him too," Miranda admitted. "I did not mean to. I was so determined not to let anyone in, but he broke down all my walls." "That is what good men do," Margaret said. "My husband was like that. He saw past all my defenses and loved me anyway." Her face grew sad. "He died 5 years ago. Accident at the docks. I used this house we bought together and turned it into something that could support me. It has been good but lonely." "I am sorry," Miranda said, taking her cousin's hand. "Do not be. I had 10 wonderful years with him, and that is more than many people get. And now I have you here, and that makes me very happy." Over the following weeks, Miranda settled into her new life. She helped Margaret run the boarding house, cooking and cleaning and managing the accounts. She discovered she had a knack for business, for remembering details and keeping everything organized. Colton found work at a ranch just outside Sacramento, working with horses like he had always wanted. He came into town every weekend, and he and Miranda would walk along the river or have dinner together. They were courting properly, taking things slow, building a foundation of trust and love. 3 months after their arrival in Sacramento, on a crisp January morning in 1879, Colton asked Miranda to marry him. They were standing by the river, watching the water flow past, when he got down on one knee. "I do not have a fancy ring yet," he said. "But I have my heart, and it is yours if you want it. Miranda Hayes, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in the small church in Sacramento on a sunny day in February. Margaret cried happy tears and served as witness. Some of the boarders attended, along with men Colton worked with at the ranch. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect. Miranda wore a blue dress Margaret helped her make, and Colton wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Colton kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They moved into a small house Colton had been saving to rent, not far from the boarding house. It was tiny, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Miranda continued working for Margaret during the days and Colton worked at the ranch. At night, they came home to each other. Life was not always easy. Money was tight and they had to work hard for everything they had. But they were happy. They were together. That was all that mattered. A year after their wedding, Miranda discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled them both with joy and terror. Colton worried about whether he would be a good father. Miranda worried about whether she would survive childbirth, having heard so many stories of women who did not. But Margaret was there to reassure her, and Colton was beside her every step of the way. In December of 1879, Miranda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after her brother. Holding her son for the first time, Miranda felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude. This tiny person was part of her and part of Colton, a living symbol of their love. She looked up at her husband, saw the tears streaming down his face, and knew they had created something beautiful. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had Colton's gray eyes and Miranda's brown hair. Watching Colton with their son, seeing how gentle and patient he was, made Miranda fall in love with him all over again. When Thomas was 6 months old, Colton came home one evening with news. "Pete Johnson wrote to me. He is getting old and wants to retire. He is offering to sell me his ranch in Texas at a price we could manage if we saved up for a few years." Miranda looked at him in surprise. "You want to go back to Texas?" "I want us to have our own place," Colton said. "A ranch where we can raise horses, raise our children. Build something that is truly ours. But only if you want to. California is your home now. I will not take you away from that." Miranda thought about it. She loved Sacramento, loved working with Margaret, loved the life they had built. But she also loved the idea of having their own land, their own dream. "Let me talk to Margaret," she said. Margaret, as always, understood. "You have to follow your dreams, dear, both of you. I will miss you terribly, but I want you to be happy, and who knows? Maybe I will come visit, see this ranch of yours." So they began saving money, every penny they could spare. They lived frugally, cooked at home, mended their own clothes. Colton took extra work when he could, and Miranda took on more responsibilities at the boarding house for higher wages. In 1882, when Thomas was 3 years old and Miranda was pregnant with their second child, they finally had enough money saved. They said goodbye to Sacramento, to Margaret, to the life they had built there, and headed back to Texas. The journey was different this time. They traveled by train part of the way, a luxury they had not been able to afford before. Thomas loved the train, pressing his face against the window and watching the landscape rush by. They arrived in Laredo in April, and it felt strange to be back. The town had grown in the 4 years they had been gone, but it was still recognizable. They stopped at the Silver Dollar Saloon, and Miranda was delighted to find Maggie still there, older but still as sharp as ever. "I knew you would make it," Maggie said, hugging Miranda tight. "I knew that Cowboy would take care of you." They stayed in Laredo for a few days, then traveled to the Johnson Ranch. Pete Johnson was in his 70s now, ready to retire to a small house in town. He showed them around the ranch, and Miranda fell in love with it immediately. It was everything Colton had described. Rolling grassland, good water, a sturdy house that needed some work but had good bones. There were corrals and a barn and room to expand. They signed the papers, and the ranch was theirs. Colton carried Miranda over the threshold of their new home, even though she was 6 months pregnant, and protested that she was too heavy. Thomas ran through the rooms, claiming one as his own. That night, as they lay in bed in their new home, Miranda rested her hand on her growing belly and looked at Colton. "We did it. We made our dreams come true." "We did," he agreed, covering her hand with his. "And this is just the beginning." Their daughter was born in July, a tiny thing with Colton's eyes and a fierce cry. They named her Sarah, after Colton's mother. Thomas was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything. The ranch kept them busy. Colton worked from dawn to dusk, building up their herd of horses, training them, selling them to buyers who traveled from all over. Miranda managed the house and the children and the accounts. She also started a garden, growing vegetables and herbs. They hired a few ranch hands to help with the work, good men who became like family. Life was hard, but it was good. They had each other, they had their children, they had their land. More children came over the years. Another son, named Charlie, born in 1884. Twin daughters, Emily and Grace, born in 1886. Each child was loved and welcomed, adding to the joy and chaos of their growing family. Miranda kept a journal through all of it, writing down the moments she wanted to remember. First steps and first words, Colton teaching Thomas to ride. Sarah learning to braid her own hair. The twins getting into mischief together. She wrote about the hard times too. The drought that nearly broke them in 1885, when they had to sell half their herd just to survive. The winter when all the children got sick with influenza, and she and Colton stayed up for 3 nights straight, nursing them through fevers. But mostly, she wrote about love. The love she had for Colton, which grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. The love they both had for their children. The love that filled every corner of their home and made even the hardest days bearable. In 1890, on their 11th wedding anniversary, Colton surprised her with a gift. It was a piano, ordered all the way from St. Louis and hauled to the ranch in a wagon. "I know you said your mother used to play," he said as Miranda stared at the beautiful instrument in shock. "I thought maybe you would like to learn or teach the children." Miranda threw her arms around him, crying happy tears. "How did you afford this? I have been saving." "Had a particularly good year with the horses. You deserve something special, Miranda. You gave up everything to be with me." "I did not give up anything," she said fiercely. "I gained everything. You, our children, this life. This is more than I ever dreamed of." She did learn to play, with lessons from a woman in town. She was not as good as her mother had been, but she was good enough. Soon the house was filled with music, and the children learned as well. Years passed. The children grew. Thomas became a fine horseman like his father, working the ranch alongside Colton. Sarah was smart and ambitious, wanting to be a teacher. Charlie was gentle and artistic, always drawing pictures. The twins were wild and free, riding across the ranch like the wind. In 1895, Margaret wrote to say she was selling the boarding house and wanted to come to Texas. She was tired of running the business alone and wanted to be near family. Miranda and Colton welcomed her with open arms, and she moved into a small house in Laredo, visiting the ranch often. Miranda and Margaret would sit on the porch together, watching the children play and talk about everything and nothing. Margaret became Aunt Maggie to the children, spoiling them with treats and stories. Life was not without its sorrows. Maggie from the saloon passed away in 1897, and Miranda attended the funeral, remembering the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. Pete Johnson died the same year, and Colton grieved the man who had taught him so much. But there were joys, too. Thomas married a nice girl from town in 1899, and they gave Miranda and Colton their first grandchild, a girl named Miranda after her grandmother. Sarah went to college, one of the first women from the area to do so, and became a teacher just like she wanted. Charlie discovered he could make a living from his art, selling paintings of the Texas landscape to wealthy buyers back east. The twins, now young women, were courting twin brothers who worked on a neighboring ranch, much to everyone's amusement. On a warm evening in June 1900, Miranda and Colton sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. They were in their 40s now, graying and weathered but still strong. They held hands like they always had, finding comfort in each other's touch. "Do you ever regret it?" Miranda asked. "Leaving Laredo with me that day." Colton turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as steady and kind as they had been 22 years ago. "Not for one single second. You gave me everything I ever wanted, a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love." "You gave me those things too," Miranda said. "And more. You gave me safety when I was running. You gave me hope when I had lost it. You gave me a reason to stop being afraid and start living." "I love you, Miranda Davies," Colton said. "I loved you from the moment I saw you in that saloon. I loved you when you told me you were leaving at dawn. I loved you when I said I was riding with you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I will love you just as long," Miranda said, leaning in to kiss him. "Maybe longer." They sat together as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land they had built together. In the distance, they could hear their children and grandchildren, the sounds of family and life and love. Miranda thought back to that desperate girl in Laredo, so afraid and alone, who had tried so hard not to hope. She was grateful that she had failed. She was grateful for the cowboy who had refused to let her ride alone, who had followed her into the unknown, who had loved her enough to change both their lives. She was grateful for all of it. The journey, the struggles, the triumphs, the love. Every moment had led them here, to this porch, to this life, to this perfect evening. As night fell and the stars began to appear, Miranda and Colton went inside together, ready for whatever the future might bring, knowing they would face it side by side, just as they always had. Their love story had begun with a simple promise. He had said he would ride with her, and he had kept that promise every single day since. Through deserts and mountains, through hardships and joys, through every moment of their lives together. And that, Miranda thought as she fell asleep in her husband's arms that night, was the greatest gift anyone could ever receive. Someone who chose you, who stayed, who loved you through everything. She had found that in Colton Davies, the cowboy who had heard her say she was leaving at dawn and had replied with 5 words that changed everything. "Then I am riding with you." And ride together they had, all the way to forever.